Oh dear, after a honeymoon shorter than Tom Cruise's trousers, this new Labour administration is to have a reset. Now, it defies the laws of political gravity that following 14 years of Tory rule, a new government could be this unpopular this soon, particularly having had over a decade in opposition to make a plan for power. Well, it seems that the plan was to say anything you have to get into number 10 and hope for the best from there. Well, it's not going well. We had the Freebie Gate row, which does matter because Sir Keir Starmer promised to clean up politics and tackle sleaze. It emerged that, frankly, he is the greediest of all 650 MPs, having taken clothes, glasses, accommodation and concert and football tickets worth over £100,000, far more than any of his peers in the House of Commons. We had the assault on pensioners and farmers, neither of which were in the manifesto. And Rachel Reeves's October budget is starting to make Liz Truss's mini-budget look like a masterclass in prudent economics, given that it has seen growth collapse from 0.5% under Rishi Sunak in July, the highest in the G7, to 0.1% now, with the OBR predicting anemic growth for years, as well as higher inflation and interest rates. Plus, the cost of government debt was higher after Reeves's budget than Truss's. Funny that. Now, The Guardian report that Rachel Reeves's tax raid has sent business confidence plunging to the lowest level since the first COVID lockdown. The Institute of Directors say that the Chancellor's record tax rises are undermining economic growth and cutting off investment plans, with bosses forced to slash pay rises, sack staff and raise prices to cope with the £25 billion national insurance increase. Now, Sir Tim Martin, the Wetherspoons boss and one of my total heroes, said the following this week. He said all democratic governments need to manage the relationship between an economic horse and a public services card. Society needs both. This government has disincentivised and discouraged the horse. He's right. We are headed for the knacker's yard. In the last 4 months, we've seen the scrapping of the Ofsted one-word inspection, taking choice and important information away from parents. We've seen a tax raid on private schools, devastating for the more than 3,000 kids whose education will be disrupted as they add a burden to an already oversubscribed state sector. And we've had the chaos, the absurd surrender of the Chagos Islands, which has enraged not just President-elect Donald Trump, but the new Premier of Mauritius too. Not so much statecraft there as what a state. There was the Rachel Reeves CV fiasco and her claims to be an economist, but possibly only an economist with the truth. And the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, resigns following an historic conviction for fraud over a work mobile. Well, she's got plenty of time on her hands now to choose a new model from the Carphone warehouse. Perhaps she's still got a few Nokia 8210s knocking around in a drawer at home. There was Labour's sellout to the unions and the inflation-busting pay rise awarded to junior doctors and train drivers. And this week, Sir Keir Starmer criticised open borders and that crazy figure of over 1 million people entering the UK in 2023 alone, even though he himself has previously blocked measures to get numbers down, and he axed the Rwanda plan, our only deterrent to stop the boats. And as the closure of Ellesmere Port demonstrates, this government's pursuit of net zero is going to hurt business, hurt the economy, cost taxpayers and cost jobs. So whether it's the bacon sandwich mutilating Ed Miliband, Sharon Stone tribute act Angela Rayner, or slavery reparations fan and Donald Trump troll David Lammy, it's hard to see any member of the cabinet that isn't an astonishing liability. And that's why last night's panel on this show speculated that if Starmer were to go, his replacement would probably be even less popular. And now there's talk of a reboot. That's right, a terrifying sequel to this Labour government, like The Hangover Part 2, but worse. This new administration is proving to be the nightmare on Downing Street, made up of the good, the bad and the ugly. And it's embarked on a mission impossible. A bit like Titanic, we know how this one ends. Your reaction, are you excited about Labour's reboot? Can Keir Starmer turn this around and win back the confidence of the British people? Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. First up, tonight's top pundits, we have former Conservative MP Michael Fabricant. We also have the editor-at-large at the Mail newspaper. That is Charlotte Griffiths, Mail on Sunday, I should add, and television news legend Michael Crick. Great to see all three of you. Charlotte, let me start with you. Can Keir Starmer turn this one around? He's going to have a reboot, a refresh. Will it work? I
don't think it's going to work. I think it's an admission of guilt. It's so embarrassing that he's even planning this thing. And he's claiming that it's been in the works for ages and wasn't conducted in the last few weeks. But I think it's a sort of admission that things have gone horribly wrong. And people are going to see it for what it is. It's going to fall flat.
Wouldn't any government have a bumpy ride with their inheritance? Whether it's the economy, broken public services, international wars. You know, haven't they inherited an almighty mess?
They have, and God knows they've told us that 1,000 times. But how many governments sort of then plan this sort of reboot 4 months in? It's almost like he's saying, OK, well, some of this actually is our fault, actually. And we do realise it's going a bit bumpily wrong. And it's a little bit of... But maybe it's a bit of an admission, really. Michael, is this talk of a reboot an admission by Labour that things aren't working at the moment?
Well, it is internally, yes. And I think that, Labour did have an awful hand dealt it, both in the economy and the public finances. And it looks like it's difficult to see the economy getting better very quickly, particularly with the prospect of tariffs, thanks to President Trump. Already, we are, if you measure GDP and GDP per head, we're heading for recession, or maybe even in recession right now, given that the population, because of the net migration figures, is now going up at the rate of more than 1% a year. Labour's problem was it didn't plan enough for government. It didn't expect to win, actually, until very late in the day. Second, I think the government lacks talent. And I think the government also lacks, particularly Starmer himself, people with political instincts. And a lot of the mistakes they've made would not have been made by Blair and the people around him, who had long-standing political instincts. Starmer's new to politics, remember.
So Keir Starmer needs Peter Mandelson, a John Prescott, and Alistair Campbell.
People like that, yeah. And he's got one or two of them. He's got Jonathan Powell, he's the National Security Advisor. He's got Morgan McSweeney. Morgan McSweeney, I think, is more of an election campaigner than somebody who knows the workings of government. Starmer is going to... his ministerial team is very weak. That's partly because the Parliamentary Labour Party was very weak, because nobody wanted to be a Labour MP in the Corbyn years. Some very talented people came in at the election, and Starmer is clearly fast-tracking them into high ministerial office. You saw that with Heidi Alexander this week. But it is... I think Labour's going to find it really difficult to win a second term.
Fascinating. Well, listen, earlier, GB News spoke to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, about how Labour are doing in power so far. Take a listen.
Been an absolutely disastrous start to the Labour administration, hasn't it?
Not at all. We've had a good increase in the minimum
Mr.
wage.
McFadden.
We've had more help for carers. We've had a freeze in the fuel duty. We've protected the pay slips of people, as we said we would in our manifesto. We've had a lot to sort out. You're right. Had to sort out a collapsing prison system. We're having to start to get the NHS waiting list down. We've got legislation going through on transport that we talked about earlier. We've got a big agenda, and this week we're going to take that forward with a new plan for change.
Interesting interview. Michael Fabricant, good to see you. You're out of the Commons now, so you can be honest. You can say what you really...
Well, I am, and I always do with you.
You're very honest. What do you think about all this?
Well, look, first of all, this nonsense. I was shocked, actually, that even you, Charlotte, believe this nonsense, that they inherited a bad situation. First of all, we have the fastest-growing economy in the G7. And, yes, there was a lot of debt per capita, but less than France, less than the United States, less than Italy. Actually, some would say that given the appalling situation that have happened with COVID, which affected the world economy, they actually came into a country where they could have actually done something. But you know why it's not working? Because when Labour got in 1997, it was New Labour. Tony Blair was not an old lefty. If you look at the cabinet now, you look at the sort of things that Keir Starmer says. He's an old lefty, a dud. He's someone who has come back from 30, 40 years ago when you thought the battle had been won, the battle of ideas, and it's not working. And they know it's not working. It's not working economically, but more importantly, it's not working with the British public.
Well, that's an interesting point. Is Keir Starmer more Harold Wilson than Tony Blair? Michael?
Well, I suppose in those... he is, in a way, in that he is basically a political opportunist.
Yeah.
And Blair had more of a clear idea of... he had certain principles and an idea of where he was going. I think one of the mistakes, the stupid mistake Labour made, and history should have told them this, is don't promise that you will never put up taxes.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, George
Almost
Bush got into
stupid as
trouble on
stop the
that,
boat.
John Major did. And you know, and to say you're not going to put up income tax or national insurance or VAT doesn't leave you with many options. And as a result, it's business that's been clobbered in a huge way rather than the pain spread out as Jeremy Hunt would have had to do, or whoever had succeeded him as a Conservative Chancellor if there had been one.
Charlotte, I mean, they've got 4.5 years to go and a stonking majority. They've got time to learn on the job, don't they?
Yeah,
Can they? Will they adapt?
I think so. I think this is the first step towards adapting. And I think that actually a leadership contest would have been triggered if it had been later on in the Premiership. With that list that you read out earlier, I mean, it is a terribly long to-do list of things they've got to change. But, you know, he's got so long to go. There's no point in triggering a leadership contest. So.
Fascinating stuff.